Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Curseof and welcome back to another video. Today we're here for another Yu-Gi-Oh discussion, and today we are going to be going over the tier list for the current format. Before I do get into this, I want to warn all of you that this is my opinion on the tier list. It might not be your opinion on the tier list. You might want to swap some decks around. You might want to throw some other decks in there. That's okay. That's your opinion. I'm going based off of the most recent results and a little bit of my personal ideas and things. But yeah, so with that in mind, yeah, let's get into the video. So real quickly, before we get into our tier 3 decks, I want to remind you guys all to hit that like button down below if you have been enjoying my content, if you're enjoying this video so far, and also subscribe. I've been thoroughly enjoying doing this Yu-Gi-Oh content. I really want to keep it going, and your support makes me want to keep it going. So if you like the tier list and the discussions and everything else I do, please give me that motivation and hit that subscribe and like. Let's get into it. So our first deck on the tier list, chilling at our number 6 spot in the tier 3 zone. The first one I'm going to talk about here is Machines. So you guys will see the statistics for the Latino Speed Duels tournaments that happened in the February month come up on one of these sides here now, and you guys will see that our machine deck is actually ranked 4th. That's pretty big, and you might be like, well, 4th is pretty high for a tier 3 deck, and yes, maybe so, but I do have some reasoning as to why I would still consider it to be only a tier 3 contender. So first off, what makes this deck extremely good is the fact that for one, you can normal summon your machine monsters without requiring a tribute if they're level 5 or 6. Therefore, you can get out things like Pendulum Machine and Giant Mech Soldier, which are 1750 beaters, which is a very high non-tribute beater for the Speed Duel format. And they do not require a tribute. These are level 6 monsters, you're just summoning them, and along with them being easy to get out and having super big bodies, they are also protected from spell effects as long as your skill is active. Due to this, you actually avoid stall strategies. They're trying to hit you with cards like Mask. You avoid things like Dark Magician. I know it's not common, but if he tries to do 1,000 Knives, it can't happen. And you get a lot of protection in your skill card Spellproof Armor. It's also probably very important to note that your machine monsters under the effect of Spellproof Armor are unaffected by Parasite Paranoid. Since Parasite Paranoid is a monster card acting as a equipped spell, its effects are negated on the machine monsters, therefore they do not become insects, and they also can still attack insect monsters. The big thing here is that they don't become insects, which means they cannot be tributed by Cocoon to summon Moth. Along with that, it's also one of the few decks that can take advantage of a very good spell card being Order to Charge. It's a quick play spell that is also removal for your opponent's monsters, giving you the ability to out things like Moth and stuff like that. And you don't have to worry about the Moth even attacking you, because it's a quick play spell, you can actually respond with it during your opponent's turn. A very powerful card that not a lot of decks can take advantage of, and this is one of the few decks that actually does have the ability to take advantage of this strong spell card. Where this deck does begin to dwindle a bit is the fact that although it can get 1750 bodies out with no issue, those are the strongest monsters it's going to get out, and along with that, you have to draw into these monsters, as this deck does not have a lot of draw cards and consistently, which is why a lot of people play Takoichi in it. But beyond even that, the only way you get these monsters out is by normal summoning. So you don't produce a lot of resources. You don't get a big board really quickly like a lot of the insects do and the parasite decks do in this current format. So although you do have some ways to play around them, you can't amass the boards that they can amass. Therefore, maybe activating Order to Charge can actually open you up really easily and take out a lot of your resources, as it is a 2-for-1, even if you do manage to get rid of their Moth. So because of this, the deck loses a lot of playability and a lot of meta standing due to its inability to amass resources very efficiently. The next deck in our number 5 spot, and also still in the tier 3 zone, is our Skull Servant Stall deck. As you guys will be able to see to my left or right, the results, you will see that this deck actually got 3rd ranking for the most 1st, 2nd, or 3rd places based on the number of entries for this deck, which once again makes it seem like a tier 3 deck, but it's doing this successful. That's pretty good. But we're gonna have a discussion, and I'll explain why it's good, but not as good as it could be. So first off, the thing that makes this deck very, very powerful is the fact that it has its consistency. It has search cards by Goblin Zombie, it has recursion through Book of Life, through Zombina, through Shrine. Along with that, it also has its skill that easily gets your Skull Servants into the graveyard to buff up your king and make it so he's very, very hard to swing over. Along with this, because it is a stall strategy, it has the room to include its burn card, to include its Spellbinding Circle for stall, to include its Floodgate Trap Holes, to include those cards that do end up being required for its strategy. Therefore, you don't have to worry about running out of room, and you can include a lot of cards that can just stop your opponent from doing anything, which gives you routes to actually defeat basically the Moth and Parasite engine. Where this deck does lose a lot of its points is the fact that a lot of people are running back row hate like Night Beam and like Dust Tornado, or Double Cyclone and Relinquished, and stuff like that. And also, basically everybody is siding for the stall matchup. So, due to this, along with that, basically everybody is either deck building or siding for the stall matchup. So although you might be running a 23 plus card deck, you're going to see a lot of people who are also running 23 plus card decks and are siding their infinites and are siding maybe just a jar or a lot of back row removal or maybe even some monster removal, which puts this deck at a severe disadvantage because it can't do what it does best, because a lot of other decks are also trying to do what it does. Therefore, it does it better, but because it lacks in a lot of other areas that the other decks make up for, it drops down a lot in its overall playability and overall meta relevance. Along with that, it versus the previous deck that we mentioned being Spellproof Armor, it doesn't do super amazing. Coming in at our number 4 slot, now in the what I would consider the tier 2 category, is another stall deck, one that I actually think is better than King of the Skull Servants, that being Viral Despair. So the first thing you guys may notice on the results chart next to me is that Viral Despair is actually ranked 5, which is lower than King of the Skull Servants. Although it did have less entries, it did get placings less as well. But I do have some arguments to explain why I still believe it's better than Skull Servants. So, the very first big thing that makes Viral Despair a little bit better than King of the Skull Servants, in my opinion, is that, for one, it plays better against King of the Skull Servants with its Book of Life, being able to actually remove your opponent's Skull Servants from their graveyard, thus lowering the attack of their king. Along with that, Viral Despair is a lot closer to creating an infinite than Skull Servants are, as if you do use your Sword of Deep-Seed it with your Viral Infection skill and you have the ability to discard it while also milling out your opponent's deck, you'll basically keep on adding the sword back to the top of your deck every single time you discard it, allowing you to create a near infinite, only being avoided by one card in the entire game, and basically no one is running this card unless you're running into a non-meta water deck. So it has almost an infinite. It's a lot better at milling out your opponent than the Skull Servant deck does, and it has the ability to play around Skull Servants. Along with all this, a lot of people are running a card known as the Forceful Checkpoint in order to counter Moths that a lot of people are running. This card basically says that if you activate this card's effect, this card basically states that if when your opponent's monster attacks, you can flip it, look at their hand. If they have a monster, you can discard a monster from their hand and negate their attack. Well, their Despair from the Dark states in the Viral Despair deck that if this card is discarded by your opponent's card effect, then you get to special summon it directly. So if your opponent flips up their Forceful Checkpoint, on your attack declaration, looks at your hand, and you do have a Viral Despair in there, and that's your only monster, well, now they're forced to allow you to summon Viral Despair directly to your side of the field. Sure, they get to negate your attack, but they basically just gave you more board presence for negating that attack. So it actually plays around a very commonly used card to stop the best decks in the game, which just adds to its overall playability. As I already mentioned before, this deck basically beats King of the Skull Serpents out because of its ability to play stall better, in my opinion, and also remove your opponent's Skull Serpents from their graveyard. Along with that, it also doesn't have to worry too much about your opponent's spellproof machine deck, because you don't need to rely so much on burn effects, but you can actually instead rely on just decking them out. And the decking out is a lot quicker and a lot faster and a lot more efficient than the Skull Serpent deck, and therefore it plays better against the two decks below it. And I believe it also handles a lot of the countermeasures done for the Moth deck a lot better, and actually benefits from these countermeasures. Chilling at our number 3 spot, and kind of bordering between tier 1 and tier 2, but probably a lot closer to tier 1, is Pure Insects. So, the first thing that obviously gives Pure Insects a big edge is Parasite Paranoid. Parasite Paranoid, along with Cocoon of Ultra Evolution, is by far the best card combo in the entire game at this current moment. It is extremely oppressive, it is extremely broken, almost to say, for the current format, and not many decks can play around it, if at all. And it makes a lot of decks completely unplayable. And this deck is Pure Insects, so it doesn't even need to incorporate it as an engine, because it is literally based around this strategy. This deck runs cards like Danny Pond to search out your Parasite Paranoid. It runs cards like your Metal Armored Bug as another target to summon off of Parasite Paranoid if you run out of Moth. It runs multiple copies of Moth, multiple copies of Metal Armor Bug. It has negation off of Metal Armor Bug, and overall has a lot of power, and doesn't need to remove other cards from its deck to include the Parasite as an engine, because it literally is the Parasite deck itself. Where this deck does seem to struggle a little bit is the fact that it is a pure insect deck, therefore things like Eradicating Aerosol can just wipe your opponent's entire field, and other decks that are playing their Moth strategies don't only have to rely on their Moth strategy solely, while this deck does. Because there's so many countermeasures that are being made to the Moth strategy, and this deck only runs the Moth strategy, a lot of decks are able to play around this, but play around it better than the ones that only run it as an engine. So although this does have the power and the consistency, it's a little bit higher than most decks getting out their Moths, it lacks any other win conditions or routes to take, and that's where it falls a little bit down below the other two decks. Ranking at a number 2 spot is the Gravekeeper Parasite deck. As you guys can see, for the results for the February month, it actually comes in at number 6 on the results, which I think is actually a little bit low for this deck, and it honestly kind of surprised me when I did look at these results. So where this deck shines above the other Moth deck is that, for one, it doesn't have to only rely on the Cocoon Moth strategy for its only win condition, and along with that is that it has a lot of consistency in other ways. Although it doesn't have its consistency for getting out Parasite all the time, it does run 3 Parasites, which is almost enough, and along with that, it has its consistencies in your Recruiter to get cards like Oracle or Ambusher or Spear Soldier to get your Gravekeeper monsters, and then it also has Recursion and being able to revive back your Gravekeeper monsters, and has a little bit more it has a little bit of room to play around with countermeasures to your opponent's monsters. So where I think it gets to be a little bit stronger than the classic Parasite deck is that, for one, it has other oppressive cards and more countermeasures to Moth, and it also has a little bit more consistency and recursion than the Parasite deck. I don't know much to say about this deck because I kind of don't like Gravekeepers. It's not my favorite archetype. I kind of stay away from them, but I do have to admit, they are pretty good. Anyway, let's move on to the number 1 deck. Chilling at number 1 on our tier list and the results for last month's tournament, we have Warrior Parasite Bitches. Warrior Parasite does rely a little bit more on the Parasite strategy than Gravekeeper Parasite does, but where it relies a little bit more, it makes up in the fact that it can counter the Parasite strategy better than Gravekeeper, can counter the strategy. First off, Warrior Parasite runs a 1800 beater without a tribute, which is already stronger than all of Spellproof Armor's beaters that would normally require a tribute. This card also has the ability to evade your opponent's skill card, Cocoon of Ultra Evolution, due to the fact that any equip cards attached to it just blow up. And because of that, Gear Fiend Parasite or Warrior Parasite has become the best deck in the entire game. Not many people are focusing on the Warrior Extermination spell card to remove all warrior monsters, because removing insect monsters is so much more prevalent and so much more necessary in the current format. And because of this, this deck can run things like your classic Blade Knight or Command Knight to run that Command Knight lock, or Gear Fiend, obviously, since Gear Fiend is like the main card in this deck besides the Parasite cards. But that's just it. That's about the only cards that it does require. So you guys can see a deck list. I had a deck list for all the other decks on as well. I didn't talk about them much. But this one I want to mention a bit more, because if you have 3 Command Knight for the Command Knight lock and just for a little bit of protection, a little bit of defense, 3 Gear Fiends, and your Parasite engine, which can be altered and shrunk or expanded, you're given a lot of room for just other cards to play, a lot more than the Gravekeeper deck offers you. So you have the ability to play cards like the Forceful Checkpoint, like Floodgate Trap Hole, or Adhesion Trap Hole, or Dust Tornado, or Windstorm, or Kunai, or Eradicating Aerosol, or whatever you require to run to make your deck good, to make your deck more powerful, to make your deck handle the meta better. Because of this factor, it handles Parasite better than Gravekeepers by sacrificing a little bit of consistency and a little bit of power. But because the whole format is so focused and so centered around the Moth and the Parasite strategy, that little bit of handling the deck better completely makes this deck, in my opinion, overshadow Gravekeepers and become the best deck of the current format. Oh boy, so that was 25 minutes of talking. Oh my god, wow, that was a lot. I definitely stumbled over my words a bit. I apologize for that, but I'm still a little bit fresh to this whole Yu-Gi-Oh! Yugi-tubing thing, and I'm trying my best. I'm having a lot of fun with it though, and I hope you guys are enjoying it and having a lot of fun with it as well. If you guys did enjoy this video, please consider hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button, hitting that notification bell so you get notified every single time I upload, which should be every second day. Hopefully that stays consistent. Can't promise it will. But yeah, that's gonna conclude this video. And if you guys do have any recommendations for following video topics, please comment down below. Anyway, that's gonna be a wrap. I'll see you guys on Friday. Yeah, I'm gonna go relax now. Peace out.